Hello and welcome back to Continuous Integration using Jenkins by Edureka. This is module 9 of this video series in which we are going to talk about performing automated deployments and continuous delivery. Now the objectives of this module would be to first of all have an overview and understand how to implement automated and continuous deployment. And we will discuss about deploying an application to an application server. So in our case, it will be Tomcat, on which we will deploy an app server. Then we will talk about Jenkins build pipeline. We will see and discuss about parallel Jenkins build. We will talk about archiving the generated artifacts. And then we will see how to integrate Jenkins with other tools such as GitHub, Slack, etc. So with that, let's get started. So the first section would be to understand the overview of continuous deployment. So what exactly continuous deployment is all about? So continuous integration should not end when application compiles correctly or when a set of automated tests are run or automatically check and audit the code for potential quality issues. So what it means is that when you have done the continuous integration pipeline, we have seen that there are only two possible ways. So the first one is whether it is a success or if it can be a failure. Now, if it is a failure, of course, it will go back to the stakeholders, typically the developers, who will then, refactor the code. They will rewrite and make necessary changes on their code base. And once that is done, it will go back and repeat the cycle again. Now, the first possibility, which is the code being successfully tested. Now, no tests have failed. Everything is successful. What next? So the next step is to have a continuous deployment pipeline. Now, it can be part of your continuous integration cycle, or in Jenkins, you can have a separate job created with continuous deployment or delivery. And then you can either put it in the same job or you can put it in a different job. And then you can create an upstream downstream project. And you can put a condition that only continuous deployment pipeline would only be triggered if continuous integration pipeline was completed successfully. So that way you are not unnecessarily triggering the continuous deployment pipeline, because there is no point of starting the deployment pipeline if continuous integration has failed. Automated deployment or continuous deployment basically extends the build automation process to the deployment phase. So this is where you take your code base to eventually to your production machines. Now CD or continuous deployment is a process where any code changes undergoes to run automated tests and other appropriate verifications, and then is deployed into production immediately. Now this makes it easier for the development teams to significantly reduce time taken to deliver individual features or bug fixes, and as a result, their throughput increases significantly. Not only that, it also helps to reduce cycle time and the time and effort involved in the overall deployment process. So the entire development process or the entire deployment process is automated, but to trigger the actual deployment manually is a one-click process. So this other place or where you have this manual check is also known as continuous delivery, and it has all the advantages of continuous deployment without any kind of disadvantage. The only reason you have continuous delivery is that when you're not comfortable with the idea of deploying your code base into production machines throughout the day 24/7. Because if you are using continuous deployment cycle or continuous deployment pipeline, whenever a developer creates or commits a code, or let's say if somebody pushes the code onto your GitHub repository, it will trigger a chain of events, and it will stop only when the deployment has been done on the production machines. And now, as you know, that your developers can commit the code any point in time. So that would mean that the deployment can happen any point in time. If you're not comfortable with that idea and you want to control when to move your code to the production machines, then you will use a pipeline which is also known as continuous delivery. Now, it has the only difference. We have a slide later on which will clearly define the difference between delivery versus deployment. However, just to give you an idea, it is the main reason or the main difference between the two is the last step where you deploy to prod. Now that step will be manually triggered. Somebody will go and click on a button called deploy. You also use this when you want to follow a release cycle. Let's say you want to deploy only over the weekends, or let's say only on the first Sunday of the month, something like that. In those situations only you will use continuous delivery. However, if you are fine with the idea of deploying your code base anytime onto prod machines, then you can just use continuous deployment. Now this technique cannot exist without an extremely solid set of automated tests, and nor can they exist without a CI environment and a robust build pipeline. So having a very good, excellent automated testing framework is extremely crucial. In fact, it is mandatory. If you don't have proper testing framework, you can't just go and do CI/CD. And of course, you need to have a proper tool like Jenkins or any other tool in the market which actually helps you. So as we have seen during our initial modules, we have a couple of other counterparts to Jenkins which are, I would say, equally good. Jenkins happens to be the most popular one out there, but you have TeamCity, you have Bamboo, you have a lot of other tools, right? Even the cloud providers are now providing tools. Like for example, Amazon has got AWS Code Pipeline is the tool which helps you doing the deployment. So these kind of tools you need to have. This is one of the mandatory things along with the testing framework. Now, delivery, this typically represents the final stage and the goal of the build pipeline. So the culmination of your pipeline step or the overall job would be to eventually deploy your code into some app server. Now, why continuous deployment? So as releases and deployment process is automated, ongoing work is released to staging and QA servers frequently. So when we release more often, the progress will be visible to the stakeholders. Faster delivery of features, constant release of features to staging servers, thus internal teams have higher visibility of the changes. They can be part of the development process as well. So this brings more transparency across different teams. So once you are using, let's say, a tool like Jenkins, you can put notifications to different stakeholders and everybody would know what is going on with their job. And that's typically in real time. So let's say you set up or you configure your Jenkins job along with Slack to put notifications over there in your team room. So what will happen whenever you start a deployment or when you basically start a build, and then whatever is the outcome of the build, let's say if it fails or succeeds or stops in between, whatever is the outcome, this will typically be notified to all these stakeholders. So they don't have to, there is complete transparency as to what is going on. And the advantage is that everybody can put in the effort and everybody can bring in their ideas to make things better. Now, feature-driven releases are better than a weekly releases, and it allows faster and fine-grained upgrades. So we always talk about this continuous deployment, continuous integration. It's all about making small and meaningful changes at a high frequency and at high velocity, right? That's what we call typically what we do in DevOps. Easy and early detection of what changes affected the system adversely. So this is one of the very important things to understand. When any tests fail, they give you an idea as to what exactly has gone wrong with your pipeline and what exactly is not correct with your code base. And this in turn enables the developers to make the changes much earlier rather than doing it later on. And again, this helps in reducing the technical debt overall. So we have two important terminologies when we talk about CI and CD. So CI stands for continuous integration. However, CD stands for continuous delivery as well as continuous deployment, depending on what context you are talking about. So continuous delivery is a practice of testing every change in a production-like environment. I mean, as close to production as possible, basically to ensure that code can be rapidly and safely deployed to production, and through rigorous automated testing, ensure business applications and services functions as expected. Higher confidence in production environments as every change has been delivered to a staging environment using complete automation. This is very important, and this is where your robustness of the testing frameworks come into picture. The more confidence you have in your testing framework and the test cases which you have written, the more confidently you can put things into production machines, and less are the chances of having a failure during deployment or later on. The continuous delivery process includes at least one manual step of approving and initiating a deploy to production. So that's the major difference as we have seen or as we have discussed about. So every change is deployed automatically to production. This is in the case of deployment. In case of delivery, there is a manual check at the end, as we see in step number 3. And continuous deployment is basically a next step from continuous delivery. So typically what we have seen that people start with continuous delivery first, and they kind of keep on optimizing their environments and their processes and the test cases and everything, so as to once they have enough confidence, they move from continuous delivery to continuous deployment. So this is a very nice depiction to understand the difference between continuous delivery versus deployment. So if you see the first and the second pipeline, we have the steps like unit testing, platform test, delivery to staging, application acceptance test, deploy to prod, and then post-deploy test. So all these steps, if you see, they are exactly the same. And the only difference from pipeline 1 and pipeline 2 is the step where you have deploy to production, which is the second last step, if you see. And this is what is manual in case of continuous delivery. And basically the trigger is manual. So as I said, somebody comes and clicks on a button somewhere, or maybe some call a job through curl or some script and does the job for you. And in second case, if you see, even that process is completely automated. So there is no manual intervention, or there is no human intervention in this whole process when it comes to continuous deployment. Now, important thing to understand, when we say manual, that does not mean that we are, doing a copy paste or starting some services and restarting some services. We are not doing all those things. It's just like an approval process, and it's just like that somebody comes and clicks on a button at a specific point in time. It is very important to understand. It's not like, it is not automated. This one is still automated. And once again, this is not something which is an IT limitation. It's not a limitation that you cannot automate this. It's by choice, not by chance. It's more like it's a business requirement that you want this to be manual. And I gave you one very good example where you want to follow a release cycle. You don't want your code to be delivered just whenever it wants to be. You want to have a check on that. That's where you use this manual intervention and you use continuous delivery instead of continuous deployment. So next, once we have understood the difference between delivery versus deployment, let's take a look at how exactly we automate this process. So some of the ways, how do you do it? So essential part of any automated deployment initiative, it's a scriptable deployment process that has to be there. As I said, it has to be automated. You cannot just do a manual copy and paste, or starting a user or stopping a service. You don't do all those things manually. Everything is scripted here. It can be, let's say it can be a shell or a PowerShell or a Python script, which you're calling from a tool such as Jenkins, or it can be a completely deployment automation tool such as Excel Deploy or Urban Code Deploy, or maybe something from cloud providers such as AWS Code Deploy. The manual file copying, manual script execution, handwritten deployment notes, they have to be automated. And the complexity of a deployment script varies from application to application. It can be as simple as stopping a service, putting the code on the machines, and then starting the service. In fact, in some cases, you don't even need to restart the service. You just go ahead and deploy on the fly. Now, for a simple website, a deployment script may be as simple as resynchronizing a directory on the target server. So many Java application servers have an Ant or Maven plugins that can be used to deploy applications. So we have seen MVN deploy already. You can do deployment through Ant as well, right? So all these tools, they can not only just build your systems or build your code, they can also help you in packaging and deploying your app. Now, for a more complicated infrastructure, deployment may involve deploying several applications and services across multiple clusters in a precisely coordinated manner. So you might have situations where you have to do deployment in a very detailed manner. You might have multiple clusters where you have to, let's say, stop and start nodes in a specific sequence. One good example would be working with Hadoop clusters. So there is a specific sequence which you need to follow, because in a single cluster, every Hadoop node is for a specific purpose. You might have Hadoop, you might have file systems like GPFS or HDFS, you might have Zookeeper or other some Kafka or all these messaging queue systems, or key value pairs. You can keep vaults. So all these things, they have to be stopped in a specific sequence. You do the deployment and then start in a specific sequence. So if you're doing all these things, then of course you need to have a much more complicated and sophisticated way of doing things. And in these kind of scenarios, what we have seen is that normal scripts will not be very helpful, or it will be simply not worth it. You rather go with a deployment automation tool. So database updates, that is again one of the crucial parts of doing a deployment. And again, there are a specialized tool set which you can utilize. Liquibase is one of the very popular tools when it comes to deployment automation of databases. It's an open source tool that can help manage and organize upgrade paths between versions of database using a high-level approach. Database updates are usually more difficult to manage smoothly than application updates, as both the structure and the contents of the database may be impacted. Now, this is especially true if you have some kind of schema changes in your databases. Then it is really, really important to make sure that you are doing things in the right way. Otherwise, you can, your application can go for a toss. And it is again very difficult if you're doing some kind of database upgrade, and if you don't have some good automation tools in place, and let's say if you have something goes wrong and you have to just roll back your changes, and if you don't have a proper automation mechanism in place, it's very difficult, almost impossible to do a rollback. Managing database updates is a critical part of both the development and the deployment process, and it deserves some reflection and planning. Yes, you need to have proper planning, as I said, if you are going ahead with database updates. Especially, you need to take care of all kinds of possibilities in mind, including if there is any kind of rollback possibility. If there is a chance of having a rollback, you should have a proper mechanism in place. You can't leave anything for chances. Some application frameworks such as Ruby on Rails and Hibernate, etc., they can manage structural database changes automatically to some extent. Not always and not as a whole, but yes, to some extent. And using these frameworks, you can specify if you want to create a new database schema from scratch at each update, or whether to update the database schema while conserving the existing data. Smoke tests is again one of the very crucial parts of overall CI/CD pipeline. Automated deployments, they needs to be followed by a series of automated smoke tests. A subset of acceptance tests can be a good candidate for smoke tests. So smoke tests, basically, they also check for the functionality, whether whatever new things which you have implemented, whether they are working properly or not, similar to what we call as unit and regression testing. However, it goes one level beyond. It sees from a very high level overview of your overall application. And of course, they should be safe to run in a production environment, which may restrict the number of modifications that test cases can do in the system. And typically, smoke tests are unobtrusive and relatively fast to execute. Now, this is a very important aspect of deployment automation. You should know how to roll back if something goes wrong. As I said, you should have proper planning for that. You can't just leave things for chances. Relatively straightforward to redeploy a previous version of an application using Jenkins. Challenge is to restore database to a previous point. As I said, database, especially if you have done schema changes, rolling back is almost impossible or extremely difficult in case of databases. So it's always a good idea to take database snapshots before you do an upgrade. So instead of rolling back the changes, the typical approach what people take is just go ahead and point to a previous database which you have taken a snapshot for. And automated database backups process in Jenkins and then save both the database snapshot as artifacts. This way, easily restore the database using the saved snapshot and then redeploy the application using the saved binary. So you can roll back the application, but when it comes to database rollback, we typically keep a copy of the old database. And if something goes wrong, we just point the older application to the previous database for which we have taken a snapshot already. Those were the strategies, how you do, what are the things you take care, or what are the things you take a look or keep in mind when you are doing an deployment automation. Now let's take a look, how do we deploy to an application server? Now, to deploy applications to a number of commonly used application servers, Jenkins provides plugins for almost all of them. For example, if you're using Tomcat or JBoss or Glassfish, you have a deploy plugin, which allows deployment to different application servers. If, let's say, you are working on IBM WebSphere application server, then you have deploy WebSphere plugin, which you can utilize. For other application servers, integrate the deployment process into build scripts or resort to custom scripts to deploy the application. So this is a very common situation. What happens is for the industry standard applications or application servers such as Tomcat, JBoss, WebSphere, WebLogic, for all these kinds of servers and the applications, you do have plugins available. But you might be using something which is not in the list and you don't have a plugin readily available for those. So in those situations, you can definitely use scripting and you can do the automation through scripts. You also have an option of writing your own custom plugins. If you have a Java skill set in-house, it's again not exactly very difficult to write a Java plugin. As we have seen in one of our earlier videos, you just write a plugin, you give it .hpi or .jpi extension, and then you need to copy this plugin to the folder, which is the home folder /plugins. So the exact path in our case, since we have been working with Linux platform, CentOS 7, so it should be typically var lib jenkins /plugins. That's where you just put your plugin which you have written and then restart the Jenkins server and then you are good to go. So also for other languages, the deployment process will vary, but it will often involve some use of shell scripting. So shell scripting or Python scripting is something which you can heavily utilize if you don't have a direct plugin to do your task. It's not only with the deployment, anything which you're trying to achieve with Jenkins, and if you don't have direct plugin available, you can always use scripting to achieve what you want. So deploying a Java application, so you have two different ways to do. So the fundamental principles of automated deployments is to reuse the binary. So basically you deploy the binaries, right? In case of Java, applications, you do a var file deploy or a jar file deploy. So the two ways, the first way is to rebuild your application during the deployment process. And the second way is to reuse the binaries generated by a previous build. So basically the first one refers to a job where you have everything in a single job, right? For example, you're doing CI, CD, everything in a single job, all kinds of testing. So in this situation, it's not exactly very efficient or very helpful because you have chances of failure high, you have unnecessary resource utilization, and it's potentially unreliable. So the recommended way is to, divide your Jenkins jobs in different parts. So you can have one part which will take care of the whole CI process, and if everything goes well, you just save the artifact in an artifact repository and you create a separate job for your continuous delivery or deployment. And then you put that artifact plugin as a source. So your first thing which you do is, in case of deployment jobs, is that you copy the artifact from the artifact repository. And one of the plugins which can help you is copy artifact plugin. This helps to copy an artifact from another build job workspace into the current build job workspace. So that typically would be your first process or the first step when you are writing a build job or a deploy job rather. So deployment, if it needs to be done on a Tomcat or a JBoss or a Glassfish server, the most useful tool will be the deploy plugin available in Jenkins. You have deploy plugin, you have deploy to container plugin, you have WebSphere deploy plugin, you have WebLogic deploy plugin. So as we have seen, you actually, you have plugin for most of the industry standard platforms such as Tomcat, JBoss, Glassfish, WebSphere, WebLogic, all these. So yes, Jenkins makes your task comparatively very easy. And again, plugin installation is straightforward. We have seen all these. We have already installed a number of plugins for our purpose, and this one is no different here. You just go to Manage Jenkins, then Manage Plugins, look for your specific plugin, and just go ahead and click on Install without restart. That's all you need to do. In fact, if restart is needed, Jenkins will tell you to do that. So in that case, you just go ahead and do the installation. Once the installation is complete, you just go ahead and restart your Jenkins server. In 99% of the cases, restarting your Jenkins service on your host does the job for you. So continuing with deploying a Java application. So first of all is the build, which is default. So default build runs the units and integration tests and builds a deployable binary in the form of a var file. So once the var file is created, you can run the additional metric check, and these metrics build runs additional checks regarding coding standards and code coverage and those sort of things. So again, which we have seen already in one of our earlier videos when we worked with code coverage tools, code complexity tools such as Cobertura, PMD, and etc. Once that is done, the third phase of the build would be to deploy to test. And what happens is, in this case, if both these builds are successful, the application will be automatically deployed to the test environment by the deploy to test build job. So this is how you kind of break your one big job into multiple single small jobs for a specific need here. And you of course always have an option of stitching multiple jobs with the help of upstream downstream projects. So in the deploy to test build job, we can copy artifact plugin to retrieve the var file generated in the default build job and copies it into the current build jobs workspace. So this is what you need to use here. The plugin name is copy artifacts from another project. Basically, copy artifact plugin is the one which we need to install. Once it is installed and you have this option in your build steps, you just click on this. This is the interface which you get, and you just need to write the name of the project, which is your source project, and where you have the artifacts. So typically if you give ****.var, so we are taking care of all the files which have .var extension and which are there anywhere inside the root directory of your build job. And of course, which build? We typically mention that the last successful build or the latest successful build. So once that is done, we use the deploy plugin to deploy the var file to the test servers. Again, we are calling it test servers, but you can deploy it to any of the servers, right? It can be test servers, it can be staging, or it can be even prod servers. So that's just a way of differentiate how you want to work with which environment here. So this plugin uses Cargo to connect to your application servers and deploy the application or redeploy, whichever is the case. You select the target server type, specify the server's URL along with the username and password of a user with deployment rights. So you need to make sure that this manager username and password, this is correct and it has got all the admin rights, because we are making changes on the server which requires admin rights. Then of course you need to make sure that the URL is correct here in this case. So in this case, our Jenkins server and our Tomcat server are hosted on the same machine. So that is the reason we are using localhost, and we just need to specify a different port for Tomcat. So in this case, it is 8888 as per this screenshot. You can use anyone, you can make the changes in Tomcat. By default, Tomcat runs on port 8080, but since if we are installing Jenkins and Tomcat on the same machine, so what you need to do, you either need to redirect your Jenkins to a different port or Tomcat. So for both, you just need to make a small change in your configuration file. In case of Jenkins, you can just go to jenkins.xml to make those changes inside the Jenkins home folder. In case of Tomcat, again, you can go to Tomcat home folder and you have something called within the conf folder. In the root directory, you have something called conf folder. And if you go to server.xml, you will have an option of changing. You can see, and when you scroll down, you can see that the default server name is mentioned as 8080. That port you can change to any port of your liking. And then you just need to restart the Tomcat service, which will do the trick for you. So one of the ways of putting a Java application onto web servers and deploying it is known as hot deploy, what we have seen before, because the application is deployed on a running container or a running server. This is generally a fast and efficient way of getting the application online, and this should be the preferred solution because of its speed convenience, and unless you have a very good reason for not using it or not following with it. This approach leads to memory leaks or resource locking depending on the application and the application server. And if any of those situations you are facing, the simplest or the quickest way would be to force the application to restart after each deployment, or schedule a nightly restart of the application server on the test machine. Right? Basically, restarting helps here if there's any kind of resource lock you are facing on any of the folders or files. So this is how it looks like when you have copy artifact plugin installed. You just need to select this option called build selector for copy artifact, and you can actually get this inside the parameterized builds, which we have seen already, right? And once you select this option, this is what you get. This is the screen which you welcomed with. You just need to enter a name or a short description. This name provided will be used as an environmental variable passed to the subsequent build steps. So whatever name you provide here, just keep that in handy and you make sure you remember it, because this will be used later on in that job. The selector allows to pack a previous build in a number of ways, including the latest successful build, upstream build that triggered this build job, or a specific build. So in case if you have upstream downstream project, you can just mention that whichever was the last build which has basically triggered the current build, that var file or jar file is the one which you need. So even that is possible. Otherwise, you can just mention the safest way. What I have seen is the latest successful build. That option serves you well most of the times. When the user selects a particular build job, the build number will also be stored in the environment variables to be used in the build steps. And the environment variable is called copy artifact underscore build underscore number underscore my underscore build underscore job, where my underscore build underscore job is the name of the original build job. So next part of the configuration is to tell Jenkins what to fetch and from where or which build job. So in the build section of the project, you mention you basically first add copy artifacts from another project step and specify the project where the artifacts were built and archived. So this we have seen already in one of the earlier screenshots. You give the project name, you give the build. So in this case, instead of using the latest successful build, we are using this option called specific build, and we are providing the build number. Now in this situation, there is one more option what we can do. We can use a combination of this job in parameterized build, and this is the parameter which we have mentioned earlier. So if you see here in one of our previous screens, this is the one. So build selector for copy artifact. So once you choose this option, you basically have an option of giving the build number at the runtime, right? So this way we need to make Jenkins use the build specified in the parameter we defined earlier. To do this, choose specified by a build parameter in the which build option and provide the variable name we specified earlier in the build selector name field. Alright, so those were the plugin based deployments. Now if we talk about scripting based, so again, this approach is not very different here. However, deploying projects using scripting languages such as PHP, Ruby, it's generally simpler than deploying Java applications, because although the issue related to database updates are similar because database works in different ways than applications, but it's generally easy to deploy compared to Java. So copying files onto a remote server. So once the source code is in Jenkins workspace, simply need to deploy it onto the target server. So to obtain the files, choose either copying them from another jobs workspace using the copy artifact, which we have seen already, or checking the source code out directly from the source code repository, right? So either of the two options are fine. In these situations, I have seen mostly the second option being used, which is checking the source code directly from the source code. Every time you just mention the initial step in Jenkins job, and you just give the URL for your GitHub or Git or SVN repository. So a tool used for this is to publish over series of plugins for Jenkins. So for example, publish over FTP, publish over SSH, and publish over CIFS. So these plugins provide a consistent and flexible way to deploy your application artifacts to other servers over a number of protocols, including CIFS, which is typically used for Windows shared drives. And of course, FTP, SSH, SFTP, all of them are applicable here. So the configuration for each of these plugins is very similar. So once the plugin is installed, again, there is no specific difference. This is just as same as installing any other plugin. Once that is done, you set up the host configurations, which are managed centrally in the main configuration screen, as you can see here. So this is where you go to manage Jenkins, and then you go to either configure system or configure global system configuration, any one of them, global tool configuration rather. Then you can create as many host configurations as you like. They will appear in a drop-down list in the job configuration page. And once everything is done, you set up the job, and then under the build section, you need to select this option called send files or execute commands over SSH. All right, so we have seen multiple ways or multiple approach to deploy applications with the help of Jenkins, depending on which platform you're working on, namely Java, PHP, Ruby, etc. Now let's take a look at a concept of Jenkins build pipeline. What exactly it is and how does it work? Jenkins Pipeline, it is a set of plugins which supports integrating and implementing continuous delivery pipelines into Jenkins. Now, we typically use something called Jenkins file, which is where you actually write your script. And again, you have two different ways of writing the script. You can write Groovy scripts, or you can write in the form of DSL. So Jenkins Pipeline definition is writing into a text file. So that text file we call as Jenkins file, which can be committed to a project's source code repository. So you can put that along with your source code or source code repository, and then you just need to select the Jenkins pipeline as a job. And once you have selected, it will ask you to put a repository location from where exactly the Jenkins file would be located. Once you do that, it will take the instructions directly from the Jenkins file, and then you can actually, whatever changes you have to make, you don't need to make any changes on your Jenkins job. Rather, those changes can be done directly on the Jenkins file. This way you have pipeline as code, we can call it, right? This is something similar to how you achieve infrastructure as code with the help of tools such as Terraform or CloudFormation in a pretty similar way. Now, syntax for defining a pipeline is same, either using Web UI or with a Jenkins file. The best practice is to define the pipeline in a Jenkins file and then check that into source code system. Now, continuous delivery pipeline is treated as a part of the application to be versioned and reviewed like any other code. So what happens whenever you make some changes to your Jenkins file, this one will also be versioned along with other things the moment you do a commit. So that way you can actually go back to a previous version. You can see what has been the changes before in some of the previous steps and all those things. So whatever you can do with your regular code base, you can do the same thing with Jenkins file as well. So why do we use pipeline? So the first thing is code. So pipelines are combined with code and checked into source control. It gives the teams a right to edit, review, and iterate during their delivery pipeline. So you are treating your pipeline as a code again. And once you have given the source code repository location, you don't need to make any changes on the Jenkins GUI. Everything you want to do, you can go on the text editor, open the Jenkins file, and make the necessary changes. And it can definitely withstand the Jenkins mastered plan and unplanned restarts. It is durable. You can also stop and wait for human intervention or approval before continuing the pipeline execution. So if let's say you have some manual checks which you want to implement, you can definitely do that with the pipelines. It is versatile, so it can have a lot of capabilities. Some of them are listed on your screen. So it supports real-world continuous delivery requirements. It has ability to fork, join, loop, etc. And the most important ability that you can perform work in parallel. So the best example is with the help of multi-branch pipeline, which gives you this ability to run multiple jobs simultaneously. Extensible, of course, the plugin supports custom extensions to its DSL and multiple options to integrate with other plugins. Just like any other component in Jenkins, plugins or pipelines can be easily extended and customized along with other things in Jenkins. So that brings us to parallel Jenkins build. Now this is, as a concept, we will understand. We have the next module where we talk about multi-branch pipeline, which basically gives you the ability to run that. All right, so far what we have seen is sequential Jenkins jobs where you have one job runs after the another. And in some cases, one successful completion of the job will trigger another job in the downstream project. The typical sequence which we have seen is compile, test, package, metric check, etc. Once those things are done, it will do deployment on, let's say, testing or staging on or on prod environments. Now, the one catch with this one is that metric check takes a very long thing to check. And more importantly, metric check is something which helps you optimize your projects, right? It's not a compulsory thing to pass in order for the code to be built. Even if the metric check has failed, you can still go ahead and deploy things on prod machines as long as you're happy with the rest of the tests. So that actually calls for the need for parallel Jenkins builds. So this is the approach which is a much better way to take when you're talking about Jenkins build. So the jobs, how you set it up is, in this case, that in order to reduce the response time after packaging the application, you trigger the staging for deployment and run metric check parallelly. So if you see here, you have a job which takes care of the compile, test, and package. And let's say once this job is completed successfully without any kind of errors or warnings, it will trigger two different jobs simultaneously. One would be the staging on deployment. In our case, as I said, it can be deployment on a staging or test or prod, any one of them, not a problem. And then the second part or the second trigger simultaneously would be on for a metric check. So this will help you save time. This will help you save resources. And then you can do things in parallel in Jenkins. So the next section would be archiving the artifacts. And again, this is one of the very important steps to be taken. Artifact in Jenkins is the result of a build, right? So when you do a package and a compile and a test and all these things, the end result which you get is an artifact. So in case of Java, it can be a jar file or a var file. It doesn't matter on which client an artifact was built, but it will be transferred from the workspace back to the master server and stored there with a link to the build. So this is especially important when it comes to distributed builds. Let's say you have master-slave architecture. And as you know, when you have master-slave architecture, the actual work or the actual job execution will be on the slaves and not on the master. But even in those situations, once the build has been created, once the artifact has been created, it will be actually transferred back to the master with a link to the build, right? So that you can access it later on. The advantage is that it is versioned, only have to set up backup on master so that all artifacts are accessible via the web interface, even if all build clients are offline. It doesn't matter if your slave is up and running or not. As long as you have the master, you can definitely access your artifacts. And the step is very simple. You just need to choose this option called archive the artifacts and give the location where you want to save the artifacts in the files to archive field. Once done, that's all you need to do. Then once the build is complete, you will have and you will get that option on the main page for your job where your archives have been saved or where your artifacts have been saved for that project or for that build. Now this plugin, Archive the Artifacts, is the one which is provided by default when you install Jenkins. You also have an option to work with the third-party artifact repository tools such as Artifactory, Nessus, etc. But as always, if you want to work with them, you just need to make sure that the right plugin is installed. For most of these industry standard tools, you do have the Jenkins plugin already available to you. And again, as if needed, you can just write a custom plugin or you can write some custom scripts. Maybe you can write some commands which is being used in those tools and call them during the execute shell step, and then you're good to go with. So that takes care of most of the things related to deployment automations and CI/CD pipelines. Now we will take a look at some of the ways how do we integrate Jenkins with other tools. To be more specific, we will take a look at GitHub and Slack integrations with Jenkins. Now GitHub integration is pretty straightforward. There is no complication here. We have already seen that you have Git plugin already installed by default. You can just go ahead and install the GitHub plugin as well. And once that is done, you just need to mention the project URL. This is typically your GitHub repository location. You just copy and paste that. And then, when you create a freestyle Jenkins project, you will have this option available for the URL to be provided. So this is how it will look like. You can even put that in the same Git plugin location as well. You don't have to have the GitHub plugin because at the end they work in pretty much the same way. Once that is done, you just need to select this option called Build Triggers tab, and you can mention build when a change is pushed to GitHub. So this is something which we have seen already in one of our earlier videos. I think the module number 3, where we spoke about how to trigger the Jenkins jobs in various different ways. So if you have any difficulties you can just go back and watch that video to refresh your memory, where we have seen all the different ways how to trigger a Jenkins job. Once that is done, you need to make a small change or small configuration on your GitHub repository as well. You go to the specific repository and you write this Jenkins hook. So you can either use the webhook section, or you can use this integrations and services sections and create this Jenkins URL. And once again, this URL, how to generate, we have seen already in one of our earlier videos. So take a look if you don't remember that and how to do it. Integration with Slack is again as easy as GitHub. So again, 2 parts to it. The first part is I'm assuming that you already have a Slack channel to you. So you have a Slack channel available. You go to that channel. Once you log into Slack, you will have an option of going to the Slack app section. So there you will find this Jenkins CI. You need to make sure it is installed, and that's it from the Slack side. Once the installing is done, you just need to make sure that these things you can configure. And you have this options called post to channel. You have a token generated, which you will need when you are configuring the same on the Jenkins side. You can put a description if you want, or you can keep it blank, and you can again give a customized name as well if you need to. Once that is done, you go to the Jenkins side. You have this plugin called Slack notification, and you just need to make sure that the plugin is installed if it is not installed already. And under the post build action, this will come and you need to select this option. And you can put a check mark on whatever ways you want to, your notification to be triggered on whatever events. So all these are denoting all the events in which you want to be triggered for your notification. Once that is done, that's done. You just need to test it. And whenever you create a job, depending on what events you have chosen, the notification will be triggered for you. So we will have a demo on Jenkins jobs, how to automatically deploy an application. For this one, we need to have the automatic deployment. We need to have the deploy to container plugin installed and configured for us. Now that's again as easy as installing any other plugin. Once that is done, you do the installation. Once that is complete, this option will automatically come under the post build actions, where you have this deploy var/ear to the container. So you need to choose this option and then fill in the details as per your application requirement. So the var file location, the context path, and container. So by default, you have Tomcat 6, 7, and 8. All of them are supported here. I don't think 9 is supported yet with this plugin, but that is supported. You need to make sure that you are providing the admin credentials for your Tomcat server, because we are making changes to the server details. So we need to have the manager credentials and then Tomcat URL. So your IP address, the port on which you have configured your Tomcat server. On the screenshot, we have this 8080 because by default Tomcat works on 8080. However, if you have redirected it to a different port, then you need to mention the port accordingly. In my case, I have redirected my Tomcat server to 9999. So I will be using that port during our demo session. All right, so the first demo which we are going to take a look at is Jenkins and Slack integration. So for that, I have my Jenkins up and running, as you can see here. And I've logged into my Slack room as well. Let's first create a new Slack room for a specific purpose. So I'll go ahead and I'll create a new channel. So let's say I give it a name. Let's make it Jenkins trigger. I don't need to invite anyone. I'm fine. I'm just testing it. So I have a new channel created in Slack for my demo. Before I do that, let's come to Jenkins and let's see if I have the Slack notification plugin installed or not. If not, we'll just go ahead and install it. So manage plugins. Let's click on installed. So I don't have any plugin installed for Slack. So let's come to available Slack. I search in the filter and so I see a lot of results when I give Slack. So let's go back. Let's make it more specific. Slack notification. So now I get it. So I just need to check out this link. If you want to know more about the plugin, you can just open this in a new tab and this will give you the information. This will take you to the home page for this plugin, which has got all the information with regards to it. Again, we have seen this in one of our earlier videos, how to work and how to manage your plugins for Jenkins. So as you can see, this tells you that this plugin allows to post build notifications to a Slack channel. And these are the dependencies. So again, no need to worry if there is a dependency which is not present. Jenkins itself will take care of it. I just need to put a check mark and then click on install without restart. Let's give it a couple of seconds. All right, so looks like it is done already. So now I have Jenkins plugin installed. What I will do now, let's go to my Slack again, and let's do some administrative tasks. So I go to administration, click on manage apps here. And as of now, I have a couple of them already installed, some apps, but I don't have Jenkins. So I can go on the top, search for Jenkins. And as you can see, the first result comes as Jenkins CI. Let's click on that. So as you can see here, it tells me that this is a customizable continuous integration server, and this integration will post build notification to a channel in Slack. So I go ahead and click on install. It is done. So I want to select a channel on which I want to post. So let's say I want to do it for Jenkins trigger. And now I need to click on this add Jenkins CI integration. So I click here, and it tells me, it already informs me that I have to install the right plugin. So in my case, I've already done step 1 and step 2 is already completed. Now is the time to go to step 3, which is, again, you go to manage Jenkins and configure system. So in my case, click on dashboard, click on manage Jenkins, configure system. So basically it's asking me for the webhook token and webhook URL endpoint. So I can get both these informations from this page. The token is this one. I just copy this whole thing and click on I just put the token, and then I come back to the base URL. I copy this whole URL and put the URL in this section, which is the webhook URL endpoint. So looks good. I don't have any other. Okay, so there's one more location. So in fact, I can just keep this blank for now, and base URL would be the one which I have copied, and integration token I can actually copy from here and paste it here. Team subdomain, I can keep it blank if I don't have anything else. Channel I can mention as Jenkins trigger, and the easiest way to quickly check is to click on this test connection. It says success. So this means that my Jenkins is now able to connect to my Slack server. And if I go back to my Slack channel, as you can see here, I already have a notification here. So it tells me that Slack Jenkins plugin, you are all set on this channel, right? So now I go ahead and click on save. So my Slack configuration on Jenkins is done. What I need to do, let's quickly create a new job. So let's say I put it as Slack trigger test freestyle. Let's open the repository. I already have this open for me. So I just copy the URL, go to my Jenkins server, click on Git and paste the URL. This way I'm at least doing something. It's not a blank project here. And once I go to the post build actions, I have this option of Slack notifications. And all I need to do is I need to tell Slack on what events I want my jobs to be triggered, or my notifications to be triggered rather. So let's say I select all. I want to be notified for everything happening to my Jenkins job here. Click on save. And then when I click on build now, it should have triggered one job already. No, not yet. All right, so let's give it a couple of seconds and we'll see if it is putting notifications on my Slack channel or not. The test was successful, so this all looks good so far. No problem here. All right, so it looks like the job has been completed successfully. Let's go back to project. It is completed, as we can see. If I go back to my Slack channel, as you can see here, it tells me that Slack trigger test started by user admin and it was successfully completed after 1 minute and 4 seconds. We have successfully configured and integrated our Jenkins server with our Slack channel, and we are able to successfully put notifications on one of the Slack channels of our choice. So for the second demo, we are going to take a look at how do we deploy a var file to a Tomcat server. Now for this, we first need to have a Tomcat server installed and configured. So what I have done is, for my demo, this is the machine on which I have Jenkins configured. As you know, we have been working so far with this machine with IP address ending with 145. I have created a new machine, new virtual machine basically, and I have installed Tomcat on this one. Let me just get the IP address. We should be able to access this through our web browser. and I have redirected my traffic to port 9999. By default, Tomcat listens on 8080, but there is an easy way to redirect. And as you can see here, I'm able to access my Tomcat server, and it says that if you're seeing this, you have successfully installed Tomcat. So far so good. We just need to make sure a couple of more things. And at the moment, if I want to access my application page, I need to go to manager/html. This page will basically show me all the apps which are configured with my Tomcat server. So as you can see here, I have at the moment 4 different apps configured along with the root. And this is the web application manager. As you can see here, I can start, stop, reload each and every application as per my requirement. Now I need to make sure that I have manager access to this machine, because this will be required for my Jenkins configuration. So for this, what I need to do, what I have done basically is I have installed Tomcat inside /opt/tomcat, and I have created a symlink for my Tomcat installation. So I just need to go there. And if I list out my directories, as you can see here, I have a lot of directories. And what I need to do, if you see here, web apps is the folder where all my applications will be stored. So you should be able to see those names which we have just seen on the web browser. So if you see here, if you compare, I have docs, examples, host manager, and manager. Similarly, you have docs, examples, host manager, and manager, and root as well, which is denoted by a / the first one. Similarly, what I need to do is I don't need to come here. Basically, I need to go to my conf folder or the conf directory, which contains all the configuration related files. And what I'm interested in is, first of all, let me show you how do you redirect the Tomcat server to a different port. So that's again a very simple procedure. What we need to do is server.xml file is the one which we need to take a look. And if you see here, when you do the installation for Tomcat, by default, this is the section which you need to make change. By default, it will be port 8080. You just need to choose any text editor of your choice. It can be VI, Vim, or Nano, or any other. You just need to make it to any port of your choice. I have redirected it to 9999, and you just save the file and just restart your Tomcat application, and it should be good. However, in order to create the users and configure the users, what I need to do is I need to check out this tomcat-users.xml file. So I'll show you what changes I have done in the file. If you see here, this is the section I have added manually on my machine. And as you can see here, I have created multiple users. This is the user which you get by default. You just need to edit the password. This will be blank basically. This is what you need to provide. I have provided a password of my own choice. And you need to make sure that the user which you are working with, so in this case I'm working with SK12K, this user should be part of the roles manager GUI and manager-script. Manager GUI access is needed to make sure that you are able to access this page, Tomcat Web Application Manager. If the user is not part of this group called manager GUI, you will not be able to access this page. It will give you a 403 error. Similarly, if you want to deploy application through Jenkins or any other such tools, you need to make sure that the user is part of this role called manager-script. So if you see here, I have added by the user SK12K to both of these roles in order to make sure that I'm able to access the web GUI as well as I'm able to deploy this application through this user. So once again, once you make these changes, you just need to make sure that you restart the Tomcat server and it all should be good then. Alright, so this is the changes I have done on my Tomcat server. And once again, I can come back to my Jenkins. Now, one more change I need to make sure that it is there is I need to go to Manage Jenkins, and I'm looking for a specific plugin called Deploy to Container plugin. So if I click on Available, so it doesn't show here. Let's check if I have already installed it. So as you can see here, it is already installed and it is enabled as well. So we are good to go here. So let's get started. The only thing remaining is that we need to create a job which will deploy the application. So what I need to do is, let's create a new item and let's make it Tomcat deploy. Again, we can choose a freestyle project. Click on OK. Once again, I will go ahead and use our repository which we have been using so far. So I'll just copy the URL, choose the Git as source code management tool, paste the repository location. So far so good. Then I need to add a Maven step to basically package my application, because once I package it will become a var file. So I'll make it as a package And as you remember, I need to give my location as maven project / pom.xml, because that is the location inside my repository, if you remember. So this is the folder where I have pom.xml file located. All right, so I have added the build step. Then I just need to click on post build action, and I need to choose this option called deploy var to a container, and it will ask me for the var file location. If I give this notation start.var, so it will basically start with the root directory and it will look for the var file anywhere inside the root directory. So that way I'm safe. Wherever the var file is located, it should be able to get it. I need to make sure which Tomcat I'm working. So as of now, I have Tomcat 8.5 installed. So I'll choose that accordingly. And I have already added my credentials here. So we have already seen how to add it. It's as easy as clicking on this button, click on Jenkins, and make sure you put in the username and the password, which we have configured inside our Tomcat users. So if you remember, I'm looking at what I've done is I have added this username and this password, because this is the username and the password which is for which these two roles have been added, manager GUI and manager script. All right, so I don't need to do that because I've done already, so I can cancel it, and I have already that. The next thing would be to mention the Tomcat URL, basically the URL of my Tomcat server. So I just need to go ahead and copy this, and I can simply paste it over here, and we are good. So click on save. So it looks like we are done. Let's go ahead and build it now. Let's see what happens. So the build has started, and if I click on the console output, it's going to take some time because we have asked it to package the repository. As you can see here, the clone has been completed. Now it is doing the package, as you can see here. All right, so it looks like it was a success. This was the var file inside the Maven project, multi3 target and snapshot.var file. And what I need to do is let's take a look if it has been successfully deployed or not. So if I come over here, at the moment, I don't see it listed. Let's refresh my page. And as you can see here, multi3.3.7-snapshot is actually part of my list of applications on my Tomcat server. And this is the name which I have given. So test-web app is the one which is the one I have deployed just now. As you can see here, at this location as well, first of all, it has copied the .var file. And as you can see here, this has been created as a folder as well. And so that is the reason I have this particular app being listed in my Tomcat application manager GUI. All right, so that completes our demo for how to deploy an app or deploy a var file, a Tomcat server. And that completes this module as well. We have understood about implementing automated continuous deployments. We have spoken about deploying an application to an application server. In our case, we used a Tomcat server and we deployed Java web application, which was basically a var file. Then we spoke about Jenkins build pipeline. We spoke about parallel Jenkins build. We spoke about artifacts, how to save them, and how you can actually put them as an input for a next job, so that you can have two different jobs for, let's say, a build test and a deployment. And we also took a look at how exactly we can integrate our Jenkins instance to third-party tools such as GitHub and Slack. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.